The Fractured Foundation. Rebecca Henderson grew up in Maplewood, a quaint Midwestern town defined by its unspoken codes of conduct and generations of firmly held beliefs. The Henderson family was a cornerstone of the community, known for their spotless reputation and adherence to tradition. Rebecca's parents, Harold and Margaret, ran a successful hardware store that had been in the family for decades. They upheld a strong sense of propriety, believing in keeping to their own. Rebecca was the youngest of 3 children, and while her older brothers fit neatly into the expectations laid out by their parents, Rebecca often felt like a misfit. She loved to paint vivid sunsets and lush landscapes, dreaming of a world beyond the confines of Maplewood. But in a town where creativity was considered a frivolous indulgence, her passion was dismissed as a passing phase. By the time Rebecca turned 20, she had grown weary of the life her parents had mapped out for her. Marriage to someone respectable from the community, children to carry on the Henderson name, and Sunday potlucks where everyone wore their best smiles and whispered gossip behind polite handshakes. She yearned for something different, something more. Her chance came when she met Darren James. Darren was an artist, a sculptor whose work had begun to gain recognition in nearby cities. He had recently moved to Maplewood to care for his ailing aunt, and his presence in the town was like a breath of fresh air to Rebecca. Darren was everything she had dreamed of: intelligent, kind, and unapologetically himself. He was also black, a fact that made their connection all the more forbidden in a town like Maplewood. Their relationship began innocently enough, with long conversations in the town library and walks through the woods where they talked about art, dreams, and the struggles of being different in a conformist world. Darren encouraged Rebecca to paint again, and under his guidance, her work blossomed. For the first time, she felt truly seen. But their relationship did not go unnoticed. Whispers began circulating, and Rebecca's parents confronted her one evening after dinner. "Rebecca, what is this nonsense we've been hearing about you and that man?" Margaret demanded, her tone sharp. "His name is Darren," Rebecca replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "And I love him." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Harold's face turned red with anger. "You don't know what you're saying. This is a phase, Rebecca. Think about your family, your reputation." Rebecca looked at her parents, the people who had shaped her world but never truly understood her. "I am thinking about myself for once," she said softly. Despite their objections, Rebecca and Darren continued their relationship, and within a year, they were married in a small ceremony attended by Darren's family and a handful of Rebecca's closest friends. Rebecca's parents refused to attend, disowning her and severing all ties. It was a painful blow, but Rebecca believed love would conquer all. For a time, it seemed she was right. The couple moved to a modest home on the edge of town, where Darren set up a studio and Rebecca found work as an art teacher. When their daughter, Alana, was born, Rebecca felt a joy she had never known. Alana had Darren's dark eyes and curly hair, and Rebecca's slender nose and delicate hands. She was a beautiful blend of them both. But the idyllic bubble they had created was fragile. Darren's health began to decline just a few years into their marriage. Doctors diagnosed him with a rare form of cancer, and despite their best efforts, Darren passed away when Alana was only 3 years old. Grief consumed Rebecca, but so did something darker: resentment. As she struggled to raise Alana alone, the prejudices she thought she had left behind began to resurface. Maplewood stares and whispers returned, sharper than ever, and Rebecca found herself retreating into isolation. Alana, now a lively and curious child, was a constant reminder of Darren. Her dark skin and curly hair made her stand out in Maplewood, and Rebecca began to resent the way people looked at her daughter. She hated the questions, the assumptions, the pitying glances. She hated the way her parents still refused to acknowledge Alana's existence. The weight of it all became too much. One day, after an especially difficult confrontation with a neighbor who had made a snide comment about Alana, Rebecca snapped. She packed a bag, dropped Alana off at a social services office in the next town, and left without looking back. Rebecca convinced herself it was for the best. Alana deserved a chance at a better life, far away from Maplewood and its suffocating judgment. But deep down, Rebecca knew she was running from the town, from her grief, and from the parts of herself she couldn't bear to face. As the years passed, Rebecca buried herself in her work, moving to a new city where no one knew her past. She told herself she had made the right decision, but the guilt lingered, haunting her in quiet moments. She avoided mirrors and photographs, unable to face the reflection of a mother who had abandoned her child. What Rebecca didn't know was that Alana, now living with a kind foster family, was growing into a strong and resilient young woman. The pain of her mother's abandonment shaped her, but it did not define her. Alana found solace in art, just as her parents had, and began to uncover the story of who she was, and the mother who had left her behind. Roots of resilience. The days that followed Rebecca's abandonment of Alana blurred into years. Life in the new city was a stark contrast to the small-town existence she had left behind. Rebecca rented a modest apartment in a sprawling metropolis, where anonymity was easy, and the judgmental whispers of Maplewood seemed like a distant echo. She immersed herself in her work, climbing the ranks at an advertising agency, convincing herself that success could fill the void that gnawed at her soul. But every achievement felt hollow. Every promotion, every accolade brought with it a question she couldn't escape. What kind of mother abandons her child? Meanwhile, Alana's life had taken a very different turn. After being placed in foster care, she was taken in by the Carters, a warm and loving couple who had long dreamed of becoming parents. Diane and Henry Carter were in their early 40s, unable to have children of their own but eager to share their love. They saw the sadness in Alana's eyes when she arrived, with nothing but a small suitcase and a quiet demeanor, and they made it their mission to give her the stability and support she needed to heal. At first, Alana was guarded. She rarely spoke unless spoken to and spent most of her time drawing in a sketchbook the Carters had given her. Her drawings were raw and emotional, filled with swirling colors and jagged lines that spoke of confusion, loss, and longing. Diane, an art therapist by profession, recognized the depth of Alana's talent and encouraged her to channel her feelings into her art. Art isn't just about making something pretty, Diane told her one afternoon as they sat at the kitchen table. It's about expressing what's inside you, even if it's messy or painful. Sometimes that's the only way to make sense of things. Slowly, Alana began to open up. She told Diane about her father, how he had painted pictures of her as a baby, and how her mother used to smile so brightly when she looked at him. She spoke of the day her mother left her at the social services office, how Rebecca hadn't even said goodbye. "I don't think she wanted me anymore," Alana said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. Diane pulled her into a hug. "Oh, sweetheart, that's not true. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense to kids, or even to themselves. But that doesn't mean you weren't wanted or loved." Despite the ache of abandonment, Alana thrived under the Carters' care. Diane continued to nurture her artistic abilities, enrolling her in community art classes, while Henry introduced her to music, teaching her to play the piano. Alana excelled in school, earning top grades and the admiration of her teachers. Yet, no matter how much love the Carters gave her, there was a part of Alana that remained unfulfilled. She often wondered about Rebecca, where she was, what she was doing, and if she ever thought about the daughter she had left behind. One day, while cleaning out the attic, Alana stumbled upon an old box of her belongings from the foster system. Inside, she found a small stack of photos, most of them taken before her father's death. There was one of her as a baby in her father's arms, both of them beaming. Another showed her parents on their wedding day, gazing at each other with a love so deep it seemed unbreakable. But it was the last photo that caught Alana's attention. A candid shot of Rebecca holding a toddler-aged Alana, her face a mixture of exhaustion and adoration. For the first time, Alana wondered if her mother had truly loved her. Determined to find answers, Alana began searching for clues about her past. She started with the records Diane and Henry had kept from her time in foster care. The files were sparse but included Rebecca's full name and the address she had listed when she left Alana at social services. Alana shared her findings with Diane, who was supportive but cautious. "It's okay to want answers, Alana," Diane said, "but you need to prepare yourself. Sometimes, the truth isn't what we hope it will be." With Diane and Henry's blessing, Alana reached out to a private investigator. It took months, but eventually, the investigator tracked Rebecca down. She was living in a different state, working as a creative director for an ad agency. Alana was stunned to learn that her mother had stayed connected to art, just as she had. Armed with this new information, Alana wrote a letter to Rebecca. "Dear Mom, you may not recognize my name or remember my face, but I'm Alana, your daughter. It's been 13 years since you left me at that office, and not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you. I've wondered if you thought about me too, if you ever regretted your decision, and if you'd want to know the person I've become. I'm not writing this to hurt you or to reopen old wounds. I just want to understand. Why did you leave? Was it because of me? Was it because I reminded you of Dad? I want you to know that I'm okay. The Carters, Diane and Henry, took me in and gave me a home. They've been amazing, and they've helped me grow into someone I think you'd be proud of. I've followed in Dad's footsteps in a way. I'm an artist. Painting has been my way of making sense of the world, of trying to fill the spaces left empty by your absence. I hope this letter finds you well, and I hope you'll consider responding. I just want to know the truth. Sincerely, Alana." Rebecca received the letter on a chilly November morning. She had just returned home from a long day at work and was sorting through her mail when she saw the envelope with no return address. As she read Alana's words, her hands began to tremble. She had spent years trying to bury her past, but here it was, staring her in the face. The pain, the guilt, the questions she had refused to confront. It all came rushing back. Rebecca sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face as she read the letter again and again. Alana's words were full of pain but also hope, a fragile thread connecting the mother who had abandoned her to the daughter she had left behind. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt something she thought she had lost entirely, the faint flicker of a mother's love. Confronting the past, Rebecca sat on her couch long after the letter slipped from her trembling hands, staring blankly at the dim glow of the city lights outside her apartment window. Alana's words echoed in her mind like a haunting melody she couldn't escape. "I just want to understand." For years, Rebecca had convinced herself that she had made the right choice for Alana's sake, that leaving her in foster care would provide her with a better life than Rebecca could offer. But the letter shattered the fragile wall of justification she had built around her heart. The memories she had buried deep resurfaced with a vengeance. She remembered the weight of Alana's tiny hand in hers as they walked into the social services office. She remembered the confusion in Alana's eyes when Rebecca hugged her tightly one last time, whispering, "You'll be okay, I promise." She remembered walking away, each step heavier than the last, until the door closed behind her, and she collapsed in the car, sobbing uncontrollably. But it wasn't just guilt that had driven Rebecca to suppress her past. It was fear. Fear of facing the prejudices she hadn't fully shed, fear of acknowledging that she had failed her daughter, and fear of what Darren would think of her if he were still alive. Now, Alana was reaching out, extending an olive branch across the years and the silence. Rebecca felt unworthy of it. She had no right to step back into Alana's life, no right to ask for forgiveness. And yet, deep down, a part of her longed to respond, to explain, to atone. The following week was a whirlwind of emotions. Rebecca drafted dozens of responses to Alana's letter, only to crumple them up and toss them into the trash. She rehearsed phone calls in her mind, but couldn't summon the courage to dial the number the investigator had provided. Eventually, Rebecca decided she couldn't face this alone. She reached out to the one person who might understand her struggle, Miriam, Darren's older sister. Miriam James had been a rock for Rebecca during Darren's illness, providing support and guidance when everything seemed to be falling apart. But after Rebecca left Alana, she had cut ties with everyone connected to Darren, including Miriam. Reconnecting after so many years was daunting, but Rebecca knew it was necessary. Rebecca. Miriam's voice was cautious when she answered the phone, a mix of surprise and suspicion. Is that really you? It's me, Rebecca said hesitantly. I know it's been a long time, but I need your help. Miriam was silent for a moment, and Rebecca feared she might hang up. But then Miriam sighed deeply. You've got some nerve calling me after all these years. What do you want? Rebecca explained everything. The letter from Alana, the guilt that had consumed her, and her desperate need to make things right. She wrote to me, Miriam. She wants answers, and I don't know what to say. I don't even know if I deserve to say anything. Miriam's tone softened. You're right about one thing. You don't deserve her forgiveness. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Alana deserves the truth, even if it's painful. She deserves to know who you are and why you made the choices you did. Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes. Do you think she'll hate me? She might, Miriam said bluntly. But she might also see that you're human, that you made mistakes but are willing to own up to them. That's up to you, Rebecca. It always has been. After the call, Rebecca finally found the courage to write back to Alana. Dear Alana, I've read your letter so many times, and each time it breaks my heart a little more. You have every right to feel hurt and angry. What I did to you was unforgivable, and I've spent every day since regretting that decision. When your father died, I felt like I had lost everything. Darren was my anchor, my light in a world that often felt dark and cruel. Without him, I didn't know how to go on. I was drowning in grief and fear, and I let those emotions control me. You reminded me so much of him, his eyes, his smile, his passion for life. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving you with people who could give you the stability I couldn't. But the truth is, I was running away. I was afraid of failing you, of not being enough. I can't undo the past, Alana. All I can do is tell you the truth and hope you'll let me back into your life, even if just a little. I want to know the person you've become, the artist, the woman, the daughter I never stopped loving, even when I let you go. Please let me know if you're willing to meet. I'll come to you, wherever you are. With all my love, Mom. Alana received the letter on a crisp winter morning. She sat by the window of her bedroom, the letter trembling in her hands as she read her mother's words. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but the reality was more overwhelming than she had imagined. Diane noticed the letter and quietly entered the room, sitting beside Alana. How do you feel? She asked gently. I don't know, Alana admitted, tears streaming down her face. I'm angry, but I'm also relieved. She's finally telling me the truth, but it doesn't erase what happened. Diane nodded. It's okay to feel all of that and more. You don't have to decide anything right away. Alana took a deep breath. I want to meet her. I need to see her face when she tells me why. Diane squeezed her hand. We'll be with you every step of the way. Rebecca and Alana agreed to meet in a neutral location, a small art gallery in the city where Alana's latest painting was on display. Rebecca arrived early, her hands shaking as she stood before a vivid canvas, filled with bold, fiery hues that seemed to dance and clash across the surface. It was titled Unfinished. When Alana walked into the gallery, their eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of them moved, the years of silence and pain stretching between them. Then Alana stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Mom, she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Alana, she whispered, tears spilling over as she reached out a trembling hand. Bridges of truth. The gallery's quiet ambience heightened the tension as Rebecca and Alana stood face to face for the first time in over a decade. Time seemed to hold its breath as they studied one another, the weight of years lost and words unspoken pressing down on both of them. Rebecca noticed how much Alana had grown. She was no longer the wide-eyed little girl Rebecca had left behind. At 17, Alana carried herself with a quiet strength, her curly hair framing her face like a crown and her eyes, so much like Darren's, brimming with curiosity and guarded emotion. "You're taller than I imagined," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with an awkward attempt at humor. Alana raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a faint, humorless smile. "And you're shorter than I remember." The tension cracked just slightly, enough for both of them to let out a nervous laugh. Rebecca gestured toward a small seating area near the gallery's cafe, and they walked together, neither entirely sure of what to say. Once seated, Rebecca clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles turning white. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice low and unsteady. "I wasn't sure you'd even want to." Alana folded her arms, leaning back in her chair. "I almost didn't," she admitted, "but I've spent so much time wondering, and I couldn't live with the what-ifs anymore." Rebecca nodded, swallowing hard. "You deserve answers. You deserve the truth, even if it's messy and painful." "I've waited this long," Alana replied, her tone measured but tinged with a sharp edge. "Go ahead." Rebecca took a deep breath, staring down at her hands as if the answers were written in her palms. "When your father died, I lost myself. Darren was everything to me. He was my anchor, my strength, my joy. When he was gone, I didn't know how to be a mother to you on my own." Alana's gaze didn't waver. "So you decided to give me away." Rebecca flinched at the bluntness of the question, but forced herself to meet Alana's eyes. "I thought I was doing what was best for you. I wasn't strong enough, Alana. I was drowning in grief, and every time I looked at you, I saw him. It wasn't fair to you, but at the time, I convinced myself that you'd be better off with someone else, someone who could give you the stability I couldn't." Alana's expression hardened. "That's not fair. You don't get to decide what's best for me without even trying to be there. You gave up before you even started." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and her voice cracked. "You're right. I did. I was selfish, Alana. I let my fear and pain control me. And not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted it." For a moment, Alana said nothing, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer but no less piercing. "Do you even know what it was like for me? To grow up wondering why my own mother didn't want me. To see other kids with their parents, and know I'd never have that." Rebecca wiped her tears, nodding as she listened. "I can't imagine how much I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, Alana. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I thought about you every day, what you were doing, what you looked like, if you were happy. I just didn't know how to fix what I'd broken." Alana's voice wavered. "You say you loved me, but love isn't just a feeling. It's action. It's staying, even when it's hard. And you left." Rebecca leaned forward, her hands trembling on the table. "You're right. I failed you in every way a mother could. But I'm here now, Alana. I know it's too little, too late, but if there's any way I can make things right, if there's any way I can be a part of your life, I'll do whatever it takes." The sincerity in Rebecca's voice gave Alana pause. She had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsing what she would say and how she would confront her mother. But now, faced with Rebecca's raw vulnerability, she found herself grappling with a question she hadn't anticipated. What did she want from this reunion? "I don't know if I can just let you back in," Alana said finally. "It's not that simple." "I understand," Rebecca said quickly. "I don't expect you to. I just want the chance to try. To show you that I've changed, and that I want to be the mother you deserved all along." Their conversation was interrupted when a woman approached their table, a gallery curator who had recognized Alana. "Miss James, I just wanted to say how much I adore your piece. Unfinished is one of the most striking works we've had in our collection." Rebecca glanced at Alana, pride swelling in her chest, despite the emotional storm they were navigating. "Unfinished," she murmured, looking at her daughter with a new understanding. After the curator left, Alana explained, "It's about everything I've been through. The loss, the questions, the pain, but also the hope. Life isn't clean or complete. It's messy and unfinished. Rebecca smiled sadly. You've turned all that pain into something beautiful. Your father would be so proud of you. Alana's expression softened slightly at the mention of Darren. I miss him every day. I barely remember him, but I feel like he's always with me. Rebecca reached out hesitantly, her hand hovering over the table. He loved you more than anything. And so do I. Alana didn't take her hand, but she didn't pull away either. I don't know where this goes from here, Alana said, her voice steady. But I think I'm willing to find out. Rebecca nodded, her heart swelling with a cautious hope. That's all I could ever ask for. For the first time in years, they shared a tentative smile. The weight of rebuilding. The weeks following their first meeting were a slow, deliberate dance of cautious steps and fragile hope. Rebecca and Alana decided to meet regularly, but both were wary of moving too fast. Alana, though intrigued by her mother's overtures, still carried the scars of abandonment, while Rebecca grappled with the overwhelming task of proving she deserved a place in her daughter's life. Their next meeting took place in a park not far from the gallery. It was a crisp winter afternoon, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Rebecca arrived early, clutching a small notebook filled with memories she had started writing down. Moments from Alana's infancy she hoped would offer a window into the love that had existed before everything fell apart. When Alana arrived, she brought her sketchbook. The two sat on a bench overlooking a frozen pond, their breaths visible in the chilly air. I thought it might help if I showed you something, Rebecca said, hesitantly handing the notebook to Alana. I've been writing down things I remember about when you were little. Alana took the notebook but didn't open it right away. She ran her fingers over the worn cover, glancing at Rebecca with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Why now? Rebecca sighed, clasping her hands together. Because I realized how much I've taken from you. Memories you should have had, stories I should have told you. It's not much, but I wanted to give you something. Anything to fill in the blanks. Alana opened the notebook, her eyes scanning the first page. Rebecca watched nervously as her daughter read, her heart pounding with every passing second. I remember the first time you laughed, Alana read aloud. Her voice was quiet, but the words carried a weight that made Rebecca's throat tighten. You were only a few months old, and your father was playing peekaboo with you. You laughed so hard you hiccuped, and we couldn't stop laughing with you. It was the happiest sound I'd ever heard. Alana paused, her finger tracing the edge of the page. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Rebecca's voice broke as she replied. Because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. But I don't want to let fear stop me anymore. You deserve to know how much you were loved, even if I failed to show it. Alana nodded but didn't respond immediately. She turned the pages, skimming through snippets of memories. Darren painting a mural in her nursery, Rebecca singing her to sleep, family picnics in the park. Finally, she closed the notebook and looked up at Rebecca. It's strange, she said. Reading this feels like looking into someone else's life, like a story I wasn't a part of. Rebecca's chest ached at the truth of Alana's words. I know it can't make up for everything, she said softly, but I hope it's a start. Alana gave a small nod, then handed Rebecca her own sketchbook. I brought this because, well, you said you wanted to know me. And this is who I am. Rebecca opened the sketchbook carefully, her eyes widening at the intricate emotional artwork inside. Each page told a story of pain, longing, and resilience. One drawing depicted a small child reaching for a shadowy figure in the distance. Another showed a bright sun partially obscured by storm clouds. This one, Rebecca said, pointing to a drawing of a tree with its roots exposed. What does it mean? Alana hesitated, then said, It's about family. The roots are supposed to represent where we come from, but sometimes they're tangled or damaged. Even so, they're still what hold the tree up. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. You're so talented, Alana. Your father would be amazed by what you've created. Alana smiled faintly. He's part of it, you know. Every time I pick up a pencil, I feel like he's guiding me." For the first time, Rebecca felt a sense of connection, not just to Alana, but to Darren's memory as well. As their meetings continued, they ventured into deeper, more difficult conversations. One day, Alana asked the question she had been avoiding since their first meeting. "Why didn't you ever come back for me?" Rebecca froze, the weight of the question pressing heavily on her. "I don't have a good answer," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was ashamed. Every time I thought about coming back, I convinced myself that you were better off without me. I told myself you were with a family who could give you what I couldn't. But you didn't know that," Alana said, her voice sharp. "You didn't even try to find out." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You're right. I didn't, and that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." The silence that followed was heavy, but Alana didn't walk away. Instead, she looked out at the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you," she said finally, "but I want to try. I think that's what Dad would have wanted." Rebecca felt a wave of relief and gratitude, though she knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "That's more than I deserve." Their tentative relationship faced its first real test when Rebecca asked if she could meet the Carters. "They've been my family for most of my life," Alana said. "I wouldn't be who I am without them. If you want to know me, you need to know them too." Rebecca agreed, though the thought filled her with apprehension. She knew meeting the people who had raised Alana would be a reminder of everything she had missed, everything she had given up. The meeting took place at the Carters' home, a cozy, welcoming house filled with warmth and laughter. Diane greeted Rebecca at the door, her expression polite but guarded. Henry was more reserved, shaking Rebecca's hand with a firm grip and a measured nod. Over dinner, Rebecca listened as Alana spoke animatedly about her life, her art, and the opportunities she had been given. She watched as Diane and Henry beamed with pride, their love for Alana evident in every glance and gesture. When the conversation turned to Rebecca, Diane was the first to speak. "It takes courage to face your past," she said, "but Alana is the remarkable person she is today because of everything she's been through, including the pain. That's not an excuse for what happened, but it's part of her story." Rebecca nodded, humbled by Diane's words. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for her. You gave her what I couldn't, and I'll always be thankful for that." Henry spoke next, his voice steady. "We've loved Alana as our own, but she's always been curious about you. If this is what she wants, we'll support her. But understand this, her trust is fragile. Don't break it again." Rebecca swallowed hard. "I won't," she promised. As the evening ended, Alana hugged the Carters tightly, then turned to Rebecca. "This is part of who I am," she said. "If you're serious about being in my life, you'll need to accept that." Rebecca nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had missed, but hopeful for what lay ahead. "I do," she said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to prove it." The healing path. Rebecca sat in her small apartment, staring at a blank sheet of paper. For weeks, she had been writing letters to Alana, some about her regrets, others about her hopes. But tonight, the words felt heavier. The page remained empty, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. How do you rebuild a bridge you burned to the ground? The past few months had been a roller coaster of emotions. Meeting Alana had been both a blessing and a trial. Rebecca knew their bond was fragile, like glass waiting to shatter under the wrong pressure. Still, she was determined to take every step necessary to mend what she had broken. That evening, Rebecca decided to take another bold step. She rummaged through a box of old photographs and found a picture of Darren holding baby Alana in his arms. Both were laughing, their joy untainted by the sorrow that would later engulf them. With the photo clutched tightly in her hands, Rebecca resolved to share it with Alana. The next weekend, Rebecca and Alana met at the gallery again. This time, Alana was exhibiting a new piece titled Roots Reclaimed. The painting depicted a tree growing through a crack in a concrete sidewalk, its roots intertwining with jagged edges. It was both haunting and hopeful. Rebecca stood in front of the painting for a long time, taking in every detail. "It's beautiful," she said when Alana approached. "It feels resilient." Alana smiled faintly. "That's what I was going for. It's about finding strength in broken places." Rebecca nodded, her voice quiet. "That's exactly what you've done." They walked together to a quieter corner of the gallery. Rebecca hesitated, then handed Alana the photograph. "I found this the other night. I thought you might like to have it." Alana took the photo, her breath catching as she studied it. Darren's warm, protective embrace and baby Alana's uninhibited laughter seemed to leap off the image. "I don't have many pictures of him," Alana said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Rebecca smiled softly. "I wish I had more to give you. Your father loved you so much, Alana. He would have been so proud of the person you've become." Alana glanced at Rebecca. Her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, gratitude, sadness, and something like acceptance. "I hope so. I've always tried to live in a way that honors him." Their relationship continued to grow, though it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced, and Alana's anger bubbled to the surface. There were days when Rebecca's guilt threatened to overwhelm her. But through it all, they kept showing up for each other. One day, Rebecca asked Alana to visit Darren's grave with her. It was a cold, overcast morning when they arrived at the cemetery. Rebecca carried a bouquet of white lilies, Darren's favorite flowers, while Alana brought a small sketch she had drawn of their family, a depiction of a happier time, with Darren, Rebecca, and baby Alana together. They stood in silence for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "I've avoided coming here for years. I think I was afraid to face him, afraid of how much I'd failed both of you." Alana placed the sketch at the base of the headstone. "I think he'd understand. Dad always believed in forgiveness. He'd want us to find a way forward." Rebecca looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Alana, for giving me a chance, even when I didn't deserve one." Alana's voice was steady but kind. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, for us. Carrying all that anger and pain, it's exhausting. I want to move forward too." Over time, Rebecca and Alana began to share more of their lives with each other. Rebecca attended Alana's art exhibitions, beaming with pride as her daughter's work gained recognition. Alana, in turn, grew curious about Rebecca's past, asking questions about her upbringing and the struggles that had shaped her. One evening, while sitting in Rebecca's apartment, they stumbled upon an old journal Rebecca had kept during her teenage years. Flipping through its pages, Alana discovered a side of her mother she hadn't known, a young woman who had loved art, dreamed of traveling, and longed for freedom from the societal constraints of her small town. "I didn't know you used to draw," Alana said, holding up a sketch of a sunflower. Rebecca laughed softly. "I wasn't very good. Your father was the real artist. He used to say art was his way of making sense of the world." Alana smiled. "Maybe that's where I get it from." Rebecca hesitated, then said, "I'd like to try drawing again. Maybe you could teach me." Alana looked surprised but pleased. "Yeah, I'd like that." As the months turned into a year, their relationship evolved from tentative steps to a more solid foundation. There were still moments of tension and unresolved pain, but there was also laughter, shared memories, and a growing sense of trust. One day, Alana surprised Rebecca with a painting she had been working on in secret. It was a portrait of their family, Rebecca, Darren, and Alana as a child. The colors were vibrant, the brushstrokes full of emotion. "I wanted us to have something to remember where we came from," Alana said, "but also to remind us of how far we've come." Rebecca stared at the painting, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect," she whispered. Alana hugged her mother for the first time in years. "We're not perfect," she said softly, "but we're trying. And that's enough." The healing process was far from over, But Rebecca and Alana had taken the first steps toward rebuilding what had been lost. Their journey was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of brokenness, there is always the possibility of growth. As they stood together, gazing at the painting, Rebecca realized that while the past could never be undone, the future was a blank canvas waiting to be filled. And this time, they would create it together. The unwritten future. The months that followed had a rhythm to them, a delicate and unspoken agreement that both Rebecca and Alana would continue forward. The shadows of the past still lingered between them, but they no longer defined their every interaction. Instead, it was the quiet understanding of two people who, though scarred, had come to accept that healing was a process, a journey without a clear end, but one worth taking. It was early spring when Alana announced she had been offered a scholarship to an art program in New York City, a prestigious school known for its emphasis on contemporary art. The news was both exhilarating and terrifying. Rebecca's heart swelled with pride, but there was a part of her that felt a gnawing fear in her gut. Alana was growing up, moving forward, leaving just as she had once done. It was in those quiet, solitary moments that Rebecca realized how much she had come to rely on their newly formed relationship. She wasn't ready to let go, not when they had only just begun to rebuild, and yet she knew this was part of the healing too. Alana's independence, her need to forge her own path. The night after the scholarship offer, Rebecca invited Alana to dinner at a small, cozy restaurant downtown, one of the few places in town that hadn't changed much over the years. The soft hum of conversation and the clink of silverware on plates filled the air as they sat across from each other. Rebecca had always believed in silence, in the stillness that allowed one's thoughts to unfold, but tonight she could feel the weight of words in the air, waiting to be spoken. "I got the scholarship," Alana said, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. She looked down at her hands, twisting the silver bracelet that had once been Darren's. Rebecca smiled, her heart swelling. "That's incredible, Alana. You've worked so hard for this." Alana's eyes sparkled, but there was something else there, something Rebecca had learned to recognize as uncertainty. "I'm scared, Mom. I know it's what I've always wanted, but I can't help but wonder if I'm leaving too much behind." Rebecca reached across the table, gently covering Alana's hand with her own. "You're not leaving anything behind that can't be carried with you. You've become everything your father and I dreamed you'd be. This is your chance to stand on your own, and I will be here, no matter where you go." Alana's voice wavered. "I don't want to leave you alone, though. I know we've come a long way, but sometimes I still feel like I'm walking a path you can't follow." Rebecca gave a small laugh, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're not walking a path I can't follow, Alana. You're walking a path that's yours. I won't be holding you back." Alana was quiet for a moment. Then she finally looked up, meeting her mother's gaze. "You've always been there, even when I didn't want you to be. And now I realize, maybe it's time for me to start letting you in. Fully. I'm not leaving you behind, Mom. I'm just growing." Rebecca's heart ached with the bittersweet realization. "And I'll always be here, Alana. Even when you don't need me. You've given me a second chance, and I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the unspoken passing between them, each absorbing the enormity of what had been said. Alana had not only forgiven her mother, but had invited her into the next chapter of her life. It wasn't a clean slate, but it was an open one, ready to be filled with new memories. In the weeks leading up to Alana's departure for New York, Rebecca threw herself into the preparations. She helped her daughter pack up her things, organizing her clothes, canvases, and books with a quiet diligence that revealed her desire to ensure Alana felt supported, even from a distance. Each moment felt like an inevitable goodbye, even though Rebecca knew this was not the end. Still, the weight of her own emotions lingered, pride for the woman Alana had become, sorrow for the years they had lost, and somewhere beneath it all, a deep fear of being forgotten. On the day Alana left for New York, Rebecca drove her to the airport. The silence between them was palpable, but it wasn't one of tension or estrangement. Instead, it was the silence of two people who had come to understand one another without words. Alana had grown up, and Rebecca had learned to give her the space to do so. At the terminal, Alana pulled her suitcase behind her, her steps slow and thoughtful. She turned to face Rebecca before stepping through security. "You'll call me when you get there, won't you?" Rebecca asked, her voice quiet but firm. Alana smiled, a mixture of affection and reassurance. "I'll call every day if you want me to. I haven't forgotten how much you've been there for me. I won't forget." Rebecca reached out, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "I'm proud of you, Alana. So proud. Go and make the most of everything. And remember, no matter what happens, I'm right here." With a final wave, Alana disappeared through the gates, and Rebecca stood there for a long time, watching her go. Weeks passed, and the space in Rebecca's apartment seemed to expand with every passing day. She kept busy, diving into her own work, taking long walks, and reaching out to the few friends she still had in town. Yet despite all the distractions, there was an emptiness, a longing for the sound of Alana's laughter or the warmth of her presence. But in the quiet, Rebecca also found herself rediscovering parts of herself she had long neglected. She started drawing again, using the time alone to reflect on her own past, the choices she had made, and the person she had become. She realized that in caring so much about Alana's future, she had neglected her own. One afternoon, as Rebecca sat at her desk, sketching the view from her window, she received a message from Alana. It was a photo of her new apartment in New York, bright, spacious, with a wide window that overlooked the city's skyline. "I made it, Mom. It's scary and overwhelming. But it's also beautiful. I wish you were here to see it." Rebecca stared at the message for a long time before typing a response. "I'm with you in spirit, Alana, and I'm so proud of you. Keep going. You're stronger than you think." As she hit send, Rebecca felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. Alana wasn't just moving away. She was becoming who she was meant to be. And in that, Rebecca realized that the woman Alana had grown into was a testament to both of them. Months passed, and the gap between their communications narrowed. Alana called more often, sending Rebecca photos of her art, her new friends, and her explorations of the city. She had become a part of the vibrant world she had once dreamed of. Rebecca, in turn, continued to draw, painting the scenes that had once been mere wishes in her heart. She had found a new rhythm, one that didn't rely on Alana's presence but embraced the space in which both of their lives could flourish. Then one day, Rebecca received an email with the subject line, "I'm coming home." It was from Alana. Rebecca opened it immediately. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want for the future. I love New York, but there's something about home that calls to me. I want to come back, Mom. Maybe not forever, but I think I've learned enough to know that I can't keep running away from the past. I want to help you build a future we can both be proud of." Rebecca's eyes welled up with tears, not of sorrow, but of joy. The journey was far from over, but it had taken them to a place of mutual understanding, respect, and love. The past had shaped them, but it would no longer define them. They were together, moving forward into a future neither had ever imagined, but both were ready to embrace. And so, as the sun began to set on the small town of Southeast Grove, Rebecca and Alana, in their own time and in their own way, finally found the home they had been searching for, together. The rebirth of family. A few weeks after Alana's email, the long-awaited day arrived. Alana was coming home. Rebecca stood in her living room, nervously adjusting the cushions on the couch for the third time, trying to make everything perfect. She had spent the past days preparing not just her home but her heart, knowing that this reunion was a turning point in both their lives. There was excitement, an undeniable anticipation, but also the fear of the unknown. Would things truly be different this time? Would they both be able to embrace the changes that had occurred in their years apart? She heard a car pulling up outside. Her pulse quickened. When she opened the door, there stood Alana, her tall frame outlined by the bright afternoon light, suitcase in hand, a smile stretching across her face. She looked so different from the girl Rebecca had seen off to New York all those months ago. More confident, more herself, her eyes carrying the wisdom of her experiences. And yet, there was still that familiar warmth, that connection that Rebecca had spent so long yearning for. Alana stepped forward, placing her suitcase gently on the porch and holding out her arms. "I'm home, Mom," she said softly. Rebecca's heart swelled as she stepped into her daughter's embrace. The years of tension and heartache melted away in that simple moment, as if the very act of holding her daughter again could heal all the wounds of the past. "I'm so glad you're here," Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling. "Me too," Alana said, pulling back slightly to look her mother in the eyes. "I've missed you more than I realized." They stood for a moment, both absorbing the significance of what this return meant. It wasn't just the physical presence of Alana. It was the return of hope, the rebuilding of a family that had once seemed broken beyond repair. That evening, they sat down for dinner at the small kitchen table that had seen so many family meals before. The smells of freshly cooked food filled the air, and the soft clink of cutlery against plates created an oddly comforting sound. For a moment, the room felt timeless, as if the years had never passed, as if this was how it had always been. "So, how's New York?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep the conversation light, but her curiosity was palpable. "It's everything I dreamed of," Alana replied, her voice animated. "The city, the people, the art, it's a different world. But it's also not home. Not like here." I realized that, as amazing as it was, I was always searching for something I already had. Rebecca smiled, a bitter sweetness in her heart. "I'm glad you found what you needed, Alana. But I'm also glad you came back." Alana met her gaze, her eyes filled with a sincerity that was both humbling and reassuring. "I think I needed to find myself first, Mom, to know who I am and what I want. But the more I was out there, the more I realized that I needed you. I needed us to fix what had been broken, not just for me, but for you too." The words were like balm to Rebecca's soul. She had spent so many years blaming herself for the rift between them, convinced that she had ruined her daughter's life. But now, in Alana's quiet wisdom, she realized that this journey was one they had both been on. Alana to find herself, and Rebecca to reclaim her place in her daughter's world. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Alana," Rebecca said softly, her voice raw with emotion. Alana smiled gently. "You don't have to. We'll do this together." In the weeks that followed, their home slowly transformed. There were no grand gestures, no immediate fixes, just small, everyday moments of connection. Alana settled back into the rhythms of her childhood home, but this time, it was different. She wasn't just a daughter seeking answers. She was an adult now, someone who had lived and learned, someone who could see the nuances of their relationship in a new light. They spent afternoons in the park, talking about art, about life, and about the pain they had both suffered. They walked down memory lane, revisiting old haunts in town. But this time, there was no bitterness in their nostalgia. Instead, it was a gentle reclaiming, a recognition of the beauty that still existed in their shared history. Alana enrolled in a local art program, determined to bring the knowledge and techniques she had learned in New York back to their small town. She began working on new pieces that captured the transformation she had gone through, a collection of works that merged her experiences, her emotions, and the healing process she had gone through with her mother. Some pieces were abstract, others more traditional, but they all carried a deep sense of reconnection, of understanding. Rebecca, too, found herself changing. She took up gardening, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the courage to pursue before. With Alana's encouragement, she began to paint again, picking up where she had left off years ago. Her first painting was of a sunflower, its golden petals reaching toward the sun in a silent defiance of the shadows. It was a reflection of her own growth, a symbol of the rebirth she was experiencing in this second chance at motherhood. But not all was perfect. The scars of the past still lingered, and there were moments of tension, especially when old wounds were brought up or when past misunderstandings surfaced. Alana would sometimes withdraw into herself, not ready to confront the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Rebecca, too, would find herself struggling with her own doubts, questioning if she had done enough to make up for the years she had lost. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alana turned to her mother. "You know, sometimes I still feel angry. Like I can't just forgive everything and move on. It's not that easy." Rebecca's heart ached as she looked at her daughter, the weight of her own regrets pressing down on her chest. "I know. And I don't expect you to just forget. I think I've learned that love isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it and deciding to move forward anyway." Alana nodded, her gaze distant. "I want to forgive you, Mom. I really do. But I also need to give myself time. I can't pretend everything's okay when it's not." Rebecca took a deep breath, her voice steady but vulnerable. "Take all the time you need, Alana. I'm here. I'll wait, because I'm not going anywhere. I want us to heal together, but I also want you to heal on your own terms." There was a long silence, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was a space of understanding, of mutual respect for the journey they were both on. And in that moment, Rebecca knew that healing was not a destination. It was a process that would take time, patience, and trust. Alana's art show was approaching, and she invited Rebecca to be there when she unveiled her new collection. It was a moment of pride, not just for Alana's achievements, but for the strength of their relationship. As they stood together in front of the crowd, Rebecca marveled at how far they had come. The love between them had not been perfect. It never could be. But it had been rebuilt, piece by piece, through vulnerability, understanding, and a commitment to healing. "I couldn't have done this without you," Alana said, her voice quiet but full of conviction. Rebecca smiled, her heart full. "You did this on your own, Alana. I'm just here to watch you shine." As the evening progressed, Rebecca realized that the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt, but she had learned one undeniable truth. Love, when nurtured with patience and care, could transcend the darkest of times. And as Alana's art filled the room with color and light, Rebecca knew that, despite everything they had endured, the future was theirs to create together. Their family was no longer defined by what had been lost, but by what they had found in each other. An unbreakable bond, a love that had been forged in the fires of the past and reborn in the light of forgiveness. And with that, they both stepped into the future, ready to write the next chapter of their story together. The road beyond. The months that followed Alana's return to Southeast Grove were a quiet revelation. The town, which had once felt like a prison to Rebecca, now seemed a sanctuary, a place where healing could take root, a place where the ghosts of the past were no longer so suffocating. Alana's art show had been the first step toward a new life for both of them, but it was only the beginning. What came next was the slow, unsteady work of rebuilding a family from the rubble of years gone wrong. It would take time, but for the first time in a long while, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that things could be different. Alana's art became her sanctuary. It was through her work that she explored the scars left by the past, finding the courage to not just remember but to confront the painful memories that had shaped her. Her paintings, intricate and vibrant, were filled with textures and colors that spoke of struggles and triumphs, moments of anger and forgiveness. They reflected the journey of a woman who was finding her place in the world, not just as an artist, but as a daughter, a woman, and a person healing from the wounds that had once defined her. Rebecca watched from the sidelines, quietly supporting Alana, but also growing in ways she hadn't anticipated. When Alana wasn't at her art studio, she spent time with Rebecca, helping in the garden or walking through the small town, the two of them enjoying the peace that had become their new normal. Still, Rebecca felt a pang of insecurity at times. When she saw the young women in town, confident and free, Her doubts would whisper in her mind. Would Alana ever leave again? Would the past come rushing back to haunt them? But each time those doubts surfaced, they were silenced by Alana's steady presence, her growing sense of self, and the steady rhythm of their lives together. Alana had changed, and so had Rebecca. They no longer defined themselves by the mistakes of the past. They were writing their own stories now. One afternoon, Rebecca found herself alone in the kitchen, the quiet only broken by the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Alana had been at the studio all day, preparing for her next big exhibition, and Rebecca had taken to making dinner, an activity she had once seen as a chore, but now found therapeutic. She had found comfort in the simple act of preparing a meal, a way to reconnect with herself as much as with her daughter. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. She wiped her hands on a towel and went to the door, surprised to see an unfamiliar face standing on the doorstep. "Can I help you?" Rebecca asked, her voice polite but cautious. The woman standing there was tall and elegant, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. She had an air of familiarity, though Rebecca couldn't place her. She smiled gently. "Hi, I'm Emily. I'm an old friend of Darren's. I don't know if you remember me." The mention of Darren's name sent a jolt through Rebecca's chest. Her heart ached at the mention of his name, a name she hadn't heard in years. She stepped back from the door, motioning for the woman to come in. I remember," Rebecca said, her voice shaky. "I didn't expect. What brings you here?" "I've been meaning to reach out to you for a long time," Emily replied, stepping inside and glancing around the home. "I know it's been a long time, but when I heard about Alana's success, I knew it was time. Time to finally face the past." Rebecca swallowed, feeling her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Emily looked at her for a moment, then spoke with a gentleness that startled Rebecca. "I was one of Darren's close friends. We grew up together. When he passed, I tried to reach out, but I didn't know what to say. And then when Alana left for New York, I lost touch. I'm sure you didn't need anyone reminding you of the past, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened, for the way everything ended." Rebecca blinked, trying to comprehend what Emily was saying. It felt surreal, like a memory from a distant time, something she had pushed away for so long that it now seemed impossible to grasp. I don't know what to say," Rebecca finally managed, her voice low. "It's been so long, Emily. I didn't expect anyone from his life to come looking for us." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "I know, but Alana is his legacy, Rebecca, and I see so much of him in her. When I look at her work, I see the same fire, the same passion that Darren had. And I wanted you to know that, despite everything that happened, I've always thought of you both. I've always hoped you found peace." The words hit Rebecca like a wave, washing over her with a mixture of sadness and relief. She hadn't realized how much she had carried the weight of the past, how much she had buried, thinking that time would erase it. And yet here it was, standing before her in the form of someone who had known Darren, who had shared in his joy and pain. "I've tried to forgive myself," Rebecca said quietly, her voice trembling. "I've spent so many years wondering if I could have done something differently. If I had stayed, if I had fought harder to keep Darren alive in our lives, if I hadn't been so afraid of what other people thought." Emily placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "You did what you had to do, Rebecca. We all make mistakes, but you've done the hardest thing. You've come back, and you've given Alana a chance to heal. That's more than many can say." For the first time in a long while, Rebecca felt the weight of her guilt begin to lift. She had done what she could to make amends, to be there for Alana in the ways that mattered. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about finding peace with it. And in that moment, Rebecca realized that the healing she sought didn't have to come from others' approval, it had to come from within herself. Alana's return to Southeast Grove had been the beginning of a new chapter, but it wasn't the end of the story. Over the following year, as Alana's career began to take off, Rebecca found herself learning to let go in ways she hadn't imagined. She had been afraid that Alana would leave again. But this time, it was different. Alana's work took her to new cities, new opportunities, but she always came back to visit, always made time for the quiet, grounding moments that had once been so hard for them both to find. It was on one of those visits that Alana sat down with Rebecca one afternoon, her eyes reflecting the peace that had settled in her heart. "Mom," she said, her voice steady, "I've been thinking about everything, about the past, about us. And I want you to know that I don't blame you anymore. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be you." Rebecca smiled, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for everything I did, but I can try. For you. For us." Alana shook her head gently. "You don't have to forgive yourself, Mom. You've already done the hardest thing. You've stayed. You've been here. And that's what matters most." And with that, the two of them sat together, a quiet understanding passing between them. The pain of the past no longer had the power to define their future. They had each other now, not as a mother and a daughter caught in the weight of old mistakes, but as two women who had found their way back to one another. As the years passed, Rebecca and Alana's relationship continued to evolve. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when the weight of their shared history threatened to resurface. But each time, they found a way to move forward, to embrace the love and healing that had been waiting for them all along. And when Rebecca finally stood in front of her own art exhibit, an exhibition of her own work, a collection inspired by the love and loss that had shaped her life, she realized that the road to forgiveness had led her somewhere unexpected. It had led her to a place of peace, a place where she could finally see herself, not through the lens of guilt or regret, but through the lens of the woman she had become. They had both learned that family, in all its complexity, wasn't about perfection, it was about growth. It was about love that endured, even through the darkest times, and it was about finding strength in the very cracks that had once threatened to break them. Together, they had come to understand the most important truth of all. Love, when given the space to heal and grow, could transcend any obstacle. And in the end, that was what would define their story. One of redemption, resilience, and the power of unconditional love.